Welcome back to Face the State. We will begin our discussion of Nevada State Ballot Question 2, the initiative to legalize recreational marijuana, with the side working to pass it. Joe Brezny with the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol is here with me to talk about that. Joe, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so to start us off, why don't you tell us generally why you're in support of this?
Well, marijuana prohibition's been a really expensive failure. We spend $40 billion a year in America policing a substance that no one overdosed on last year. No one overdosed on it the year before that or the year before that, because it's impossible to overdose on marijuana. And yet we spend 80% of our drug intervention budget on policing marijuana, and we don't spend nearly as much on going after opiate drugs, which killed 47,000 Americans last year. So we've really got our priorities backward with this, and since a couple of states have taken the lead and have gone ahead and moved toward regulating this, we can see what that looks like in these other states. So if you take a look in Denver, teen use of marijuana is down in a legal market because teens are having a harder time getting it. DUIs are trending down overall for alcohol and marijuana, so regulating it doesn't cause any problems there. And it's something that's starting to produce tax revenue for the schools. They produced $45 million in the last year for schools. They had a surplus of marijuana tax revenue, so they actually went above and beyond the normal budgeting that they had for that money, and they just funded a new anti-bullying program statewide with marijuana tax money. So overall, it just makes sense that since this has been such a failed policy of prohibiting this, you know, we've had this prohibition for 40 years, and we haven't driven down a desire for the drug in America. We haven't driven up the prices of the drug in America, and we haven't made it less available. And so if they were going to prohibit something, I would think that they would do it because it's harmful, and marijuana is less harmful than alcohol. And I would think after 40 years of trying to prohibit this, they would be successful on one of those points, and they haven't been. And so it's time for a new approach. And so we've got medical marijuana here, where we have a really high bar, where we have a few licenses that we vet and do background checks on our people who own these marijuana licenses very deeply. And these are our neighbors. These are people who have been in the community for 40 years. And these are people that we have trusted to sell medical marijuana to the community. And those are the people that we're going to trust once this passes to sell retail marijuana to the community. So,
but that's just initially, right? After that, it would
right.
open it up to other businesses to sell. It wouldn't just be the types of dispensaries that we're seeing currently.
No, but if you look at what happened in Colorado, they had a similar measure where they let the medical marijuana people go first. And so you have that, when we're taking those first steps and moving this bar incrementally, we want to do it in a way that's really socially responsible. And so having the businesses that understand the regulations that are in place, understand the security measures that are required for this, that's a great first step, and that's what worked well in Colorado. And then if you look at what they did in Oregon, even with their release of adult retail marijuana, recreational marijuana, they did it incrementally, where they let the medical marijuana shops sell a limited amount of just the flower first, and then they let them sell 1 gram of extracts, and they waited, and then they're finally letting them sell what the law allows with extracts. And so doing it a little at a time and letting the folks who have done this first have the first crack at it seems like the safest way to move forward.
Now, I think one of the main concerns being voiced by the opposition to this isn't really about the traditional picture of marijuana, which we see as someone smoking a joint maybe, but it's the edibles, which are easily masked, hard to detect, and can get in the wrong hands easily. So what's your response to the concern that we're not really dealing with the same marijuana that we had in the 60s?
Well, the other side, the only way that their point makes any sense is if they can scare people, is if they can make it so that either the marijuana is bad or that the people in the business are bad. And so they have to have that as a central argument, or prohibiting this just doesn't make any sense. So
but I think, to a parent, the prospect of a kid getting their hands on really potent edibles is scary. It's
right.
not a scare tactic, that is scary.
Well, if we talk about the specifics of what's going on in Colorado, so for edibles, we've had edibles for 40 years. There have been pot brownies around for 40 years, but the pot brownies in the 60s and 70s, you didn't know if all of the THC was in one brownie or if it It was evenly spread throughout. There wasn't any childproof packaging. And so we've had people making these edible products for decades in an unregulated market, in the black market. But now that we have a regulated market, they saw that in Colorado, when they didn't have any limits on potency, that's when they had the issues with kids going to the emergency room. But the other side will say that there's been this massive spike, but they don't tell you the real numbers. 47 kids went to the emergency room last year in Colorado for medical marijuana edibles, accidental ingestion of them. None of them died. It's not fatal. You can't overdose on it. But if you compare that with the 1,400 kids that went to emergency rooms in Colorado for chewing on Tide laundry pods or drinking Drano or cleaning products, which can kill them, it puts it in perspective that this is a problem that we want to make sure that we address, but it's a very small problem, and it's something where regulation is a better way because we can educate parents. In Nevada, you need to be responsible around your kids. You need to lock up your guns, you need to lock up your alcohol, you need to lock up your marijuana, and you should lock up your opiate drugs as well. We've got to take that responsibility as parents and police that within our own homes. Under the system that we have now that rewards the cartels and the drug dealers without having any dispensary system, they don't check ID. That's what's going to push edibles to our kids. Instead of having a system where we can check ID at the door, make sure kids have a harder time getting it, and we can educate the parents on how to keep this away from their kids.
What about the argument that this actually isn't going to eliminate the black market because when it goes through the whole rigmarole of being taxed and regulated, it'll be expensive. So people are just going to go for the cheaper product, which they can get illegally.
Yeah, the numbers don't support that. If you look at, and I think it's because we're being smart about this in Nevada. If you look at what they did in Washington, they originally had a 25% tax from the wholesale grower to the extractor, then another 25% tax from the extractor to the retail establishment, then another 25% tax from the retail establishment to the end consumer. With that high of a tax, that made it so expensive that the black market did have an incentive to stay around. But the taxes that we're talking about passing here, we have a 15% excise tax on wholesale marijuana. We're trying to strike a balance between producing reasonable revenue so that we can provide enough money to regulate this and cover the cost of regulation, and also provide a little bit of money for education once we cover the regulatory costs. We want there to be a surplus. $45 million was the surplus that went to education in Colorado last year. So we need to produce income so that this is worth it for the state, but we don't want to tax so heavily that we incentivize a black market. The Colorado taxation rate is higher than ours. It's higher than ours would be here if question 2 were to pass. 70% of the black market has been eliminated from Denver and from Colorado with regulation, and the black market that remains is changing. The cartels are pulling out of Colorado because they can't make money anymore. In the black market, marijuana was $250 to $350 an ounce. Now it's about $99. So the cartels can't make money at it anymore because when we're not putting in all of those security costs that the cartels have to go through, and we're just growing it locally in a secure place here and selling it in a secure place here, we can dial those costs down and sell marijuana at a lower cost.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left, but I do want to touch on this other safety concern, which is road safety. Right now, there is no way, there's no marijuana breathalyzer, no way for police to detect how much marijuana is in a person's system in the field without a blood test, which you can't do in the field. So how do we make sure that this doesn't make Nevada's roads more dangerous?
Well, if you look at the numbers again as to what's happened in Colorado, DUIs are dropping. DUIs for alcohol are dropping, DUIs for marijuana are dropping. So any suggestion that regulating marijuana will cause a spike in DUIs, the numbers don't back that up. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because if you're going to drive under the influence of marijuana, you have to make a really irresponsible choice to consume marijuana and then get behind the wheel of a car. If you're that irresponsible that you're going to do that, marijuana is not that hard to get now. Even though it's illegal, it's reasonably easy to obtain. And so if someone is irresponsible enough that they're going to smoke a joint and then drive, they're doing it now, which is why we have the toughest DUI law for marijuana in the country right now. So that's an issue that's there now, and regulating marijuana won't cause a spike in that.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so what's your closing message to voters? What would you most like them to take away from this?
Well, The comparison between marijuana and alcohol is one that really makes sense because it's something that we regulate well here. We regulate alcohol well here. We regulate gaming to the gold standard here. Nevada is a state where we believe in our personal freedoms, and we believe that we can, as a society here, regulate things that other states may not think are possible. People didn't think that gaming could be regulated in 41 states, but we set the gold standard for that, and now 41 states have copied that. When I think about the disservice that we're doing to our citizens right now under the black market system, where someone like me, who just chooses to consume marijuana rather than alcohol and is making a healthier choice, I'm treated like a criminal and I'm penalized. And that's not fair to our citizens. It's a waste of our law enforcement resources, and we're really putting our kids at risk under this system, under the black market system, because drug dealers don't check ID, and business people will. A responsible business person is not going to risk their license by allowing this to get into the hands of a kid. And so the industry can come to the table, work with police, work with the schools, work with the education system, and find ways to help drive down youth usage rates and keep this away from kids. So it can be a social benefit in many ways, and we can provide some tax revenue for education.
Okay, Joe, thank you so much
Thanks,
for your time.
Fran.
I sure appreciate it. Well, coming up on Face the State, we will be back with the other side of the issue. Stay with us. Great job.